Hi, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the Senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. Welcome to this week's edition of Kibbitzing with Kagan, brief conversations with people I find fascinating. Today's guest is a totally fascinating cabinet secretary, Rafael Lopez from the Department of Human Services. Thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you for having me, Senator. I'm thrilled to be part of Kibbitzing with you.
Yay. So I am almost done kibitzing with the entire cabinet, and you guys are all so damn impressive. Your background is especially intriguing to me. Let's start with the background, then we'll get to what you're working on today. First off, one of the first things that jumped out at me, and I only want to do this briefly, but you went to Vassar for 2 years, my alma mater. Give me a very brief, a happy memory, something you liked about being there before you transferred to become a banana slug at Santa Cruz.
Sure. The fall on the campus and was extraordinary, and the kind of colors that I experienced for the first time as a 17-year-old freshman has left an indelible mark on me. And so fall on the East Coast is one of my favorite seasons. So the look of the Thompson Library, those
Yes.
extraordinarily old, multiple hundred-year-old trees,
Yep.
have a very special place in my heart.
I love that. Thank you. All right. Then you became a banana slug and went to Santa Cruz and then the Kennedy School at Harvard. And I'm going to go through some of your background pretty quickly with a couple of pauses because your background's amazing. You moved to Maryland in 2009, became president and CEO of the Family League of Baltimore City, NEEKC Foundation, the nonprofit sector, as my background is, as Governor Moore's is, and what a great thing. And you hosted a White House forum on nonprofit leadership. And then, of course, the White House hired you for the Office of Science, Technology, Policy in the Domestic Policy Council and stuff. The Department of Health and Human Services, where you oversaw 25 programs. And I loved your quote, "Change is possible. Yes, it's hard." And that's such a great motto. So the one more thing before I pause, your appointment was delayed by Congress in all of the crazy partisan stuff. And so by the time you became official, you had a countdown calendar in your office, as I have in my Senate office. I have a 90-day countdown calendar. So what you work on is literally life or death. So we're going to talk about that, but talk about what it was like to work in the White House, what that trajectory was, and something you're proudest of.
Sure. It's interesting because when I think about that time, both in my and our life as a country, it feels like so long ago because we're a different country today than we were then. And the
True.
thing that was so motivating to me and inspiring was watching the way in which President Obama and the First Lady, Michelle Obama, acted and behaved in the public domain. And one of my favorite memories was actually one where I was playing an informal role. We lived in Baltimore at the time, and I'd offered teachers a field trip to the White House.
Yes.
We took this large group of children from City Neighbors School together, and it happened to be a day where the president was in the Rose Garden announcing a surge in Iraq, and there was going to be a Marine One landing. And so as I was bringing the group of kids into the White House for the tour that staff members would lead, my friends and colleagues said, "Hey, if you have a little bit more time, you might be able to see Marine One take off."
Oh my
So
God.
as we're standing outside after the tour, we watched the president and first lady go to approach the grass on the side of the lawn, south side of the lawn, and I knew that the moment that either one of them saw this group of kids, I bet in my mind that they would come over, and that's exactly what they did.
Oh my gosh.
Flew toward from the Marine One helicopter, came over and talked with every single child, every single grandmother and parent and cousin who joined us. And it was one of those moments where how you treat people matters, how you give them kindness and show them respect and dignity. And that to me is the biggest memory I have of my time at the White House. And then fast forward to be nominated by the president to serve in a role that required Senate confirmation. And
Yeah.
fortunately, I was part of hundreds of nominees that were literally held up. So I was fortunately still working at the White House while I was waiting for the Senate hearing and the confirmation. But I felt like it was a joy because every time I went through the gate, I got sort of chills up my
Of
spine. I thought
course.
the moment that you don't feel that sense of extraordinary opportunity, it's time to go. And I never left that spirit. And when I got to HHS in the role,
Health and
I,
Human Services.
exactly. Thank you. Yes, the United States Department of Human Services, Health and Human Services, and I was serving as the United States Commissioner for the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families. And the role ranged from everything on being responsible for the nation's child welfare system to looking at adolescent pregnancy prevention and youth and runaway homelessness. And the same thing I felt, which was that I put that countdown that you mentioned on the board.
Yep.
And the idea was it was X number of days until the weekend because we had to take advantage. That's what I wrote on the board. We
Oh my
had to take advantage of every second in office to do right by the people of
God.
this country. And
Right.
that's what was amazing.
So the way you described the chill and the inspiration is the way I used to think about when I was a chief of staff on Capitol Hill. If I can leave my office and see the United States Capitol by moonlight and
Hmm.
not be awestruck by it, it is
That's right.
time for me to go.
That is exactly right.
It is really such a privilege to serve.
Yes.
Um, So let's talk about how, well, no, before we do this, you work to reunite children with their families. It is one of the most disgusting things that our country has ever done. The Donald Trump dividing immigrant young children from their parents and putting them in cages and all this stuff. Talk about that chapter, which is just so
Sure.
awful.
Sure. I think the thing that strikes me the most about that time was that there might very well have been, and there was, a transfer of power between administrations, between the Trump and the Biden administration. But consequences of elections matter and they linger, right? It's not a moment in time. And I happen to be, I call it the honor and privilege was given to me to be able to be deployed to the United States border and to be
Mhm.
on the ground as part of the larger Biden-Harris administration team that were thousands of people, from federal employees to contractors, to try to respond to the single largest surge of unaccompanied children in our nation's history. And no one is ever fully prepared for that. So when I think about that first time on the ground, I was first deployed to an emergency shelter um, in um, in San Antonio, Texas. And the memory I have most is in the middle of the night when buses would come with children. My thought was that they needed to see my and our team's face of welcome, and
Right.
because it wasn't their fault that they were in the circumstances they were in. I think that goes to the arc of the work that I do here in Maryland, which is children, whether they're in foster care or whether they are in kinship care, or adults in protective services, or young people or people trying to make ends meet, that
Yeah,
oftentimes they find themselves in situations not always of their own making. And
sure.
so the way I think about that moment is also highlighted by being asked to go to our nation's largest shelter for children that had 5,000 kids in tents. And so I will never forget those moments of walking into where larger than football size filled tents
Yeah.
where children lived, and being tasked with trying to create some order out of the chaos so that
Unbelievable.
we could value children and place the integrity of their lives as what some people call human-centered design, making sure we're responsive.
Yeah.
So doing that and then being deployed to Michigan to care for children who came from Afghanistan. And
Yeah.
so I think in each of those moments, unaccompanied children, I think I met children from Africa, from India, from Pakistan. Despite popular myth that all children who immigrate to this country illegally, quote unquote, are children from Mexico, it's simply not the truth.
Right.
And and how we treat people matters.
Agreed. Amen. And thank you. Let's fast forward.
Sure.
Because I really find that just the most heartbreaking, disgusting, among many heartbreaking and disgusting policies and actions. But let's move on. When did you first meet Westmore? Talk about the, were you interested? Did they approach you? Talk about the interview process and stuff to get to this chair that you're sitting in.
Sure. Trying to think about when I actually first met Westmore, but I didn't know him personally previously, so I was not part of his immediate inner circle, and the administration reached out to me about this opportunity. And so I was thrilled to consider it and honored to be asked to interview, but it was a legitimate interview. I went through multiple rounds. It's actually interesting. A lot of people are curious about how it was, and just like any other job, they put us through the grinder. We had multiple layers of interviews before any of us who are now cabinet secretaries actually met the governor.
Yes.
So I think the first time I sat down with the governor in person was one of the last steps in terms of the interview process, and there had been multiple layers of vetting, as well as literally questions and answers. And so I think the thing that I remember the most about that experience, there's some funny memories, we don't have a lot of time for that, about the day, but there's a moment where I remember watching the camaraderie between the governor, his current chief of staff, Fagan Harris, Secretary of Appointments, Tisha Edwards, and Deputy Chief of Staff, Johnny Dorsey. And the thing that I remember most is how they engaged each other with such love and kindness. And that was something that stood out to me, and it stands out to me now. And I thought, that doesn't always happen with people. And so that's the thing that that happened during the interview, was watching that interaction, and then watching the governor engage as I dove into trying to articulate a different way of imagining a Department of Human Services that moves into the 21st century in a very different way.
Amazing. And you called him governor. Was he governor-elect, or was he?
He was governor-elect at the time, correct. He was governor-elect, that's correct.
So talk about taking the call, getting the call, and getting started.
Sure. So the call came from the governor himself.
Of course.
And as what happens in any political transition administration, we're all sworn to secrecy until the thing happens. And I remember that I got the call and, of course, said yes. And at that point, you know, when one goes through various rounds, it's almost like your anxiety both builds, but also your intentionality to want the job built, especially when I sat down with the governor. So said yes, but there was a lag time between the public announcement, which we couldn't say anything, of course. So there was a moment I was running a national call in my former federal role.
Right.
And my personal phone started blowing up, and some friends were like, "Oh, you're all over Insta." And I was like, "No, I'm not. I'm running a call." Well, it turns out there was an announcement with 6 or 8 cabinet secretaries and all of our headshots. Right. So it was that moment of just, I mean, being overjoyed, thrilled, scared all at once, because we are going to be coming into an administration filled with such extraordinary hope and potential and power. It was all those things all at once.
Amazing. So you started, you inherited a department from the Hogan administration. What was your vacancy rate? What was your biggest challenge when you walked in the door? Among many, I'm sure.
There, oh Lord Jesus, there are many, and you know, in the spirit of kibbitzing, one has to speak truth.
Yes.
So I started Inauguration Day, obviously, and the thing that still sticks out to me now and shapes the way in which I and we all lead in this administration is about moving with a different kind of urgency and engaging people with the kind of respect and dignity you deserve. So on the vacancy rate alone, it's fascinating. The governor gave us all a charge to really engage Marylanders and put folks back to work, right? Who want to. And I'm thrilled to report that we were among the departments that when I came in, we had a less than stellar vacancy rate, actually one of the worst in the entire state of Maryland. On January 1st of 2023, I'm trying to think if it was a calendar year marker, we were just above 15%, like 15.20% vacancy rate. By the 31st of December of last year, we had gone down by 5.51% and ended
Right.
the year with a 9.69% vacancy rate. That's a
Nice.
significant adjustment in
Yeah.
one calendar year alone.
Great.
That does not happen on its own. We also have been tracking relentlessly our turnover rate. In calendar year 2022, we were somewhere around, I want to say 18% and change. I actually have that exact number somewhere, but then
Right.
by the
Yeah.
end of calendar year 2023, we were at 13.96%.
All right.
Again, and Senator, I think part of it is that none of these things move on their own. You have to be relentless about building that metric muscle so you know what is happening and
Yes.
taking advantage of what's on the books, like things like same-day hiring, which Department of Human Services had never done. Never
Wow.
done.
So let me just be clear to
Sure,
someone watching. This is not, and I'm going to use the icky word.
sure.
This is not just like bureaucrats pushing paper.
No,
This is about people implementing policy, people responding to constituent needs.
right.
This is important people implementing legislative and executive agendas. So let's now among the many responsibilities you have are child abuse, domestic abuse, homelessness, drug and alcohol, foster care, hunger. I mean, you've got so many things. And as I said earlier, literally life and death. How do you possibly prioritize? How do you start to attack all of those needs?
Mhm. I think there's a couple of things that ground our work, and one of them is the weekend before we came into office and we bared witness to the governor and lieutenant governor swearing their oath. The
Mhm,
governor and lieutenant governor convened us as a cabinet for the first time
mhm.
and laid the foundation of driving all of our work by the Moore Miller administration values. And literally from the very first day in office and driving from Annapolis to Baltimore to take on the work, I have led and we have led with those values. There
Nice.
isn't a meeting at DHS that we lead that doesn't include the values on the agenda. They're
Mhm.
there as a reminder that they're not words on paper, but we must aspire to and live by them. And that is easier said than done.
And
That is how we begin. Oh, yes,
other than leave no Marylander behind, give
sure,
us one or
sure.
two else that others
Absolutely.
that guide
Absolutely.
you.
So one of them I've been referring to a couple of times already in our conversation about moving with urgency, right?
Yes,
We will lead with urgency. We will move with urgency. We
and
will be
kindness.
data driven and heart led. So
Yep.
the data behind spreadsheets and metrics isn't absent of humanity, but we have to use metrics and data to drive our strategy to make hard decisions that also must be led by our heart. And that is specific to the Moore Miller administration values. Things like being courageous,
Yep.
challenging the status quo. And those are 4 specific values of the 12,
Yeah.
and each has a descriptor. And whenever I'm engaging our team, we have almost 6,000 members of the DHS team across the state of Maryland in all 24 jurisdictions, as well as headquarters. I try to intentionally reference, as does our senior leadership team, so that we are reminding our people that we're going to put our money where our mouth is and our mouth where our values are, and we're going to try to do our best. And even when we will probably make mistakes, because to live those values means to act with urgency and to be courageous. And not everyone cherishes courage. I've learned that I
Mm.
believe we must continue to strengthen the muscle across Maryland to lead with a moral courage and to not be driven and led by fear, which sometimes paralyzes departments like ours.
Amazing. So I have to tell you, at 1 o'clock, I was watching and listening to a podcast interview with you. Secretary Lopez, you are a national policy leader, and your head and your heart. Really, I mean, we are so blessed to have you. I've always respected and admired you, but preparing for this interview, you are just anyway, you're extraordinary. Let's move on. So, COVID fraud is yet another thing on your agenda. Talk about how we are helping people who need and deserve the help, and yet cracking down on people who have stolen from government.
Sure. That one is a particularly heartbreaking one for lots of reasons. And one of the things that I like to remind people of is, elections have consequences. We said it earlier. And here's an example of a positive consequence in the context of a national crisis. So on, let's say, January 1st of 2023, a few weeks before inauguration, the policy of the state of Maryland was to do nothing on the replacement of stolen benefits. And specifically for our listeners who are listening to, who follow you, Senator, this is about things like putting food on your table, being able to go to the grocery store and buy food, or being able to buy clothes for your back or your children's back. The SNAP and TANF benefits, two acronyms, but most people will recognize them as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, right? And the kind of money we get to be able to support families. And so we have seen a national increase in these rings of thieves, people who are stealing literally food out of people's mouths. And it's not just a Maryland problem, it's a United States problem.
Yes.
And people have gotten very sophisticated. So we completely did a 180. This administration came into office. We wanted to do something different. We were the first state in the nation to apply for and receive the support of the United States Department of Agriculture, who's responsible for some of these benefits. And then we worked with the legislature, many of your colleagues and yourself, to turn legislation, to turn a bill into law around trying to make sure that we can also do right by Marylanders. And as of this morning, we are thrilled to report that we have now helped over 29,000 households and reimbursing $18.187 million. And while no system ever launches perfectly, we built that from scratch. And the idea here is that the assignment wasn't to be the first in the nation, as the governor often says, but we understood the assignment, which is to lead courageously, to challenge the status quo, and to try something different. And we're still struggling. We are even trying to implement security measures, which we're the first state in the nation to test. We have a new lock-unlock card feature electronically using our phones. What we're learning is that getting the word out isn't enough, because the sophistication of these thieves, who I believe unethically are willing to take, whether it's baby formula or vegetables or meat, out of the family's homes, it's simply unjust. So we're trying very hard to continue to strengthen this muscle of ours, to partner with the legislature. And as we're moving into year 2, course correct so that we can make sure more people know. And we can also decrease the amount of theft in partnership with federal agencies to make sure this is not a Maryland issue alone.
Right. Talk about the portal, MyMDThink. Just give us a little bit of a bit on that. What's special about it? What's unique? How is it helpful?
Sure. So MDThink is as the state of Maryland's benefits platform. Is probably the best way to think about it. But millions of Marylanders use it for everything from birth certificates to applying for benefits. And one of the things that we have found in our administration is the importance of speaking truth about where things were stuck or not working well. And we approach this work from when things aren't working well, it's not a personal critique or a blame issue. We've got to get it right for Marylanders. And so particularly the public-facing portal, which is the way in which we have more people interact, has to dramatically change. And it's one of the things we've been working on. So to give you an example of what we've been doing recently, we know that it wasn't built for a mobile-first environment, which is really bizarre to us. So most people, not just in the state, but in the nation, don't first go to their laptops to apply for things. We use our phones. Whether it's Amazon or ordering a Lyft or an Uber or ordering pizza. And so we're trying to apply in this administration a fresh look at how we're going to strengthen the public side of the portal so it's not frustrating for people. We don't want to keep people away from the help they need. We want to make it seamless, swift, and easy, right? And so on that front, it's going to take some time, and we're already fast at work on this. We are working with a group called Code for America, for example, who's working closely with our MDThink team. We're going to be testing in Maryland across multiple county jurisdictions ways to streamline the process of applying. We're going to rapidly prototype these ideas. Why? We want to fail fast so that we can figure it out on how to make it easier for Marylanders. And that's part of our goal.
So I'm really interested in, it seems like DHS is at the center of a lot of hubs. So talk, if you would, briefly about how you partner with other departments, how you partner with nonprofits, and how you partner with the counties. How
Sure.
much of it is top down? How much of it is bottom up? If you could give 3 brief examples.
Sure. Uh, Great questions. And as I'm quickly trying to go through my memory,
Yeah,
I'm going to start with the last one first.
sure.
It was stunning to me to learn, and our executive leadership team, that there, for whatever reason, there is this perception or myth or culture that headquarters, quote unquote, which is mostly Baltimore and Annapolis,
Sure.
is distinct from the 24 jurisdictions. And
Yes.
I came to this work from small local governments, small nonprofits, where the work gets done at the local level,
Mhm.
not in some bureaucratic, headquarter office. And
Right.
so one of the first things we did was, when we figured that out, it had what I would argue are um, negative impacts and consequences on the way we were going to lead in this administration. So we brought all those leaders of all county jurisdictions to the table. We rebranded ourselves.
Mhm.
That's the executive leadership team.
Love.
Why? Because if you are in Montgomery County or Cecil County or Queen Anne's,
Yeah.
you are leading essentially a mini version of the Department of Human Services
100%.
on the ground, but you are the ones who have access to systems and communities and networks in the way I would never have,
Sure.
no matter how long I was here. So that's
And
number one.
wouldn't
Oh,
want to get into the weeds on that.
but also it's about shaping your strategy, and that ties to the other question you had, which is when we were just planning the launch, the soft launch of the to replace stolen benefits. I was stunned to learn that when our team asked, "Oh, where's the list of all of our nonprofits to whom we can blast these issues?" We wanted to have a
Yeah.
town hall. We were going to
Sure.
do this in English and
Didn't
Spanish.
exist.
It
Right.
didn't exist. So
Yeah,
you
sure.
ask yourself, DHS is the second largest department in the state of Maryland.
Yep.
And it doesn't have these systems already in place. We're literally building them from scratch. And that
Yeah.
comes to your third one, which is, when I think about my colleagues on the cabinet, one, we actually get along and like each other, which is
Right.
not, it's just not to be understated. But more importantly,
Yep.
someone like Secretary Scott, who leads health,
Yep.
why would I be so arrogant to think that I can work on Medicaid, which I do, without her and their partnership?
Of course.
But
Right.
she and I, with our teams, are building brand new muscles to work together. Why? Because of years of not working so nice together in the sandbox.
Yes.
So I feel like it ties your question together, which is, you can't do what you haven't done unless you try. And sometimes it's a little messy. I'd be a liar if I told you it wasn't. But people like Secretary Scott, or Secretary Schiraldi in Juvenile Services, or
Yep.
Secretary Scruggs, our families don't live in departments or divisions.
Right.
They live
Right.
in community in Maryland. And so it is on us to navigate them and to make it easier for families. And that's going to take years after we've gone. But the governor and lieutenant governor have said it is our job to leave Maryland better off than we found it. And to begin to, what I've said is, we're planting seeds in Maryland that'll grow trees under whose shades we'll never rest. And that's okay with us, because it's not about our ego. It's about actually doing right by the people we serve.
You are very quotable, Mr. Secretary. Very
Uh-huh.
nice. Love that. I love that. Okay, so you've done the cabinet, the nonprofits, the counties, and you brought up my next question,
Oh, sure.
which is you're bilingual and our state. So I've enacted 2 language access laws because the reality is that we are ethnically and linguistically diverse. My district is the most linguistically diverse, and both Gaithersburg and Rockville are in the top 10 most linguistically diverse cities in the country. Talk about why that's important.
Sure.
How your leadership is going to make a difference on that.
Sure. It's fascinating because even in growing up, when you think about the literature around bilingual, bicultural children of any backgrounds or languages, it is nice to finally see that the world is more accepting of multiple languages. Even growing up myself, I'm a Gen Xer. There was oftentimes shame around being able to speak multiple languages, and whether it was bias or racism. But fascinatingly, I realized as I've gotten older and more mature that it's one of my superpowers, is that I can code switch in multiple languages, and it sounds so obvious and basic now, but as you said, why would we not want to strengthen the way in which we engage people so that we can engage? The common language might be English, but what about French, or or French Creole, or Korean or Chinese? So that's what I've brought to this job, is a willingness to try something different. again, surprisingly, Maryland struggles immensely with its ability to provide multilingual access to the people we serve. DHS is front and center in that challenge. I was shocked to learn that we did not have a muscle built around even releasing things bilingually. So sadly, one of the wins when we released our stolen benefit replacement work was it was the first time DHS had ever launched in 2 languages. I would have launched in more, but literally the weekend before the soft launch, our principal deputy secretary, Cornelius White, myself, and God bless her, one of our staff members, Claudia Casedo, and I were literally working on the Spanish language translation because we were not satisfied with what we've gotten back. And that's an example of Maryland shouldn't be in that position. It's 2023. And so we're trying very hard.
Now, actually.
That's right. That's right. And again, it'll never be quick. It'll never be easy, but you've got to try. And so what we're trying to do in terms of your question of my and our leadership is model that language access is fundamental to how we move forward. And rather than simply be reactive to the criticism of DHS, which was legitimate, we have to be more thoughtful of how we engage, not just in writing, but also in our 24 jurisdictions across the state. That's going to be a larger lift. We are intentionally asking our leadership to be mindful of being welcoming to diverse cultures and diverse languages so that we can be much more responsive.
Good. So I still have a bunch of questions, but I also want to start thinking about wrapping up. So I would be irresponsible if I didn't talk about 211. So it's not all government. Sometimes people need help. They need a bed, they need food, and they call 211. Can you just super briefly talk about that service?
Sure. 211 is the quickest way to think about non-emergency 911 items. So if you say, I need help getting some clothes for my kid to start school, calling 211 is a great way to start. So the way I think about it in Maryland is that we need to be thoughtful around how we use all the tools and all the levers at our disposal to connect people to the help they need when they need it.
Exactly. And shout out to Quentin Askew, the CEO, my buddy, and you and I and Quentin and others have been talking about 211, 311, 911, 988, all the things, but we're going to move on. Have you ever thought of running for office?
Yes and no. I will never run for office again. I did in my early 20s. I ran for and was elected twice to a city council. And I served although interestingly, much like you, it wasn't a full-time job, but it was a full-time job, but it didn't pay, So I was the executive director of a nonprofit while I served as a city council member in my 20s. But my career is mostly the behind-the-scenes person on helping shape policy. I don't need to be the elected official myself.
All right. How do you balance your really demanding department with family? A lot of times people ask that of women. I ask that of men too.
I agree. First of all, I'm glad you asked it, and I'll give you my take on it because I think that unfortunately in the public domain we don't talk about these things enough.
We have to,
We have to. These are not private matters, but in fact public matters of our civil society. So the honest answer is that my family serves, and part of how I came to that was when I was serving at the White House. What struck me was that there are things that you miss when you work the hours that you do. And you can never make that up. And so you can't justify to a partner, your spouse, however, define your relationship, your children, your family. It's the trips you don't take, the parties you miss, etc. So I have often said and believe that at my core, my family serves in these roles. It is a demanding role, and many times they have to sacrifice so that I can do this for the people of Maryland, or do whatever I was doing for whatever role I was in. And that is the same thing that I like to remind people, that I've never found anyone who's got it all figured out. And I feel like no one does, because there are moments where some of us take up more of the responsibility than others, whether it's the grocery shopping or cooking. And sometimes I might be able to do it. Sometimes my wife has to, etc. But it's hard. And I think that we have to say that out loud, which is that it's a struggle to figure out. There are days and weeks where I do it much better, and there are times where I don't do it well at all. And I make mistakes.
Related question. What you deal with is, what makes you mad, what makes you sad, what makes you want to pull your hair out, what makes you cry, and how do you take care of your own mental health and those of those around you?
That's been weighing on my mind a lot, Senator, because what enrages me is people's inability to move with urgency when I see that something is truly on fire.
Yes.
And what I've learned here in this role is that we have a lot of culture change, call it change management, to do, not just in the Department of Human Services, but across the great state of Maryland, around what we have come to accept as normal, which is either mediocrity or failure. And I refuse to accept that, particularly when we are advocating for the people who need our help the most. And unfortunately, I am one of the people in the state of Maryland that gets notices when a child has been injured or dies. And sometimes when I read the details or learn about the case or dive into something, it's most often, not always, most often because of bad decisions adults make around them.
Wow.
And I have been using a line that I believe at my core, but I think it's new for a lot of the folks around me, which is join me in my outrage. It doesn't mean join me in my outrage and do nothing or simply be mad or yell. It's join me in my outrage and take action, to move with urgency, to actually set a new course of excellence for Maryland, because that's what our kids and that's what our elders and that's what our families deserve. And I said this morning on a call to myself, the people who oftentimes need our help the most, they don't have lobbyists.
Right.
They're trying to make ends meet. So we have to be thoughtful about how we use our time. And there are days where particularly when I'm driving somewhere and I've had a particularly rough day or a call or a meeting where I've learned something that just breaks my heart, where I just cry. Tears just come out of my eyes.
You're making me cry right now.
And I say to, whether it's my team or my family, our bodies release by their energy, right? It could be tears. I have a nervous laugh sometimes, all those things are part of who I am. And I think as we're more comfortable with ourselves, I lead with fearlessness. I'm not afraid to say what I need to say. And I'm not afraid to speak about the truth of what I've found in this role. And that's okay, because I can't do it by myself. And that's the model that we get from the governor, lieutenant governor. We need our posse. We need our squad. We need all of us to really, really turn things around for Maryland and the country. And that's exactly what we should be doing.
Well, on that note, it's time for the Fast Five.
All right.
Quick questions, 5 quick answers. Question number 1, Secretary Lopez, what advice would you give to your younger self?
You're more powerful than you think you are.
Love that. Question 2, totally different. What's the best concert you've ever attended?
Gosh, I'm not.
I think a shout out to my interns who have come up with some of these.
Well, I think probably mariachi, which is a very traditional Mexican. Some of my family's from Mexico. I love mariachi festivals, particularly when I was thinking about. Although I haven't been to an actual festival, the concert was at a flea market. I love it. Yeah.
Fun. Question number 3, what do you do to relax? Get off the grid.
Yeah. I think that it's being somewhere near water. Water is very soothing to me. So it might be a creek or a river, preferably an ocean, or a bay. But I think getting close to water or seeing the water is something that's important to me.
Nice. Question number 4, what is your favorite family tradition?
We have lots of fun ones, but I think one of the ones that we just finished the holiday season and we celebrate Christmas in my family. And we have a tradition around choosing ornaments for our children that reflect their year. And as I look at the tree this year, as my eldest is turning 18 this week, there are a collection of ornaments that reflect, my child's life. And they range from his love of Curious George, to powerlifting and muscle building. And I think to myself, that tradition of having something on the tree that now tells a story of the life of our children is pretty magical.
That's fabulous. I love that. Question number 5, Secretary Rafael Lopez, the Department of Human Services. What is your hidden secret superpower? Skill or talent you have, something you're really good at that most folks can't do.
Most folks can't do. Let me think. It'll sound kind of warped, but it's true. When I'm faced with like some of the toughest emergency situations, whether it's a car accident on the road or something happening, I absolutely jump in and I don't second guess. And it's just something I've learned that I'm pretty good at doing. Longer story as to why I'm good at that, not for this episode, but I think that I've learned that a lot of people sometimes get scared and they freeze up in the middle of an emergency, and that's not how I roll.
Freeze up or run away.
Or run away. True.
Not everybody runs too.
True.
Yes.
So,
well, that's a great superpower. Mr. Secretary, thank you for all you do, and thank you so, so much for taking time to kibitz with me today. It's really a pleasure and an honor, and I look forward to seeing you soon in Annapolis.
Absolutely. I'll see you on Wednesday. Have a wonderful day. Take care.
Stay well.
Bye-bye.